Yes, my friends, it is the We Got Nets podcast. I'm Adam Armbrecht, back on the old feed, starting a new feed, talking still, though, all things Brooklyn Nets basketball. There'll be plenty of time to reintroduce myself as I stay connected to the Nets community and revive what was the little baby thought of covering the Brooklyn Nets. Doug Norrie and myself, almost 7 years ago, starting the Nets 7 years ago, 6 years ago, whatever it is, starting the Nets podcast coverage with We Got Nets, and then obviously building over to our friends on Locked On. But no better time to restart this feed than coming off the historic 5 first-round pick draft for the Brooklyn Nets. No better time than to try to address some of the concerns from the fan base around the 5 players that were selected for the Brooklyn Nets and what it means for this franchise going forward. So, right off the bat, we're going to go through all 5 players. We're going to talk about on a high level what I think the Nets' approach was to the draft, why it pretty much lined up the way that we thought, even if not necessarily with all the players that were selected, but philosophically how it lined up. And then whether or not we think there was a better version of it, right? If we did it differently, how could it have looked for the Brooklyn Nets picking at 8, picking at 19, 22, 26, and 27? Could we have built a better team? And the funny thing about it is, obviously, we won't know. All these guys that got taken by Brooklyn, and they got taken across the league, right? You're not going to know until you get through Summer League, until you get into the NBA. And so many of them, when we're not talking about the Cooper Flags, the Dylan Harpers, the VJ Edgecombs, even the Con Knipples, who end up going 4, the Ace Baileys, who end up 5 at Utah. We're not going to know about these guys after that certain group, and even in the instance of Ace Bailey, right? Something different as far as what he ends up being, potentially. But we're not going to know about all these guys for a while. And in the case of the Brooklyn Nets, we may not know potentially for a year or 2 years, because that's what the Brooklyn Nets did in this draft, taking a lot of deep players in terms of development process and what it was going to look like for these guys to come to fruition potentially. So, kicking it off there, the Brooklyn Nets, will address this very briefly. Obviously, they don't spike the better lottery odds when it comes to getting up higher on the board. That was probably disappointment 1, and starts to get the fan base a little bit riled up when it comes to what they did or did not do in terms of the tank 1 season ago. They also then, when you start to hear the rumblings about Ace Bailey, he doesn't want to go necessarily to certain teams. He's trying to avoid Philadelphia. He's interested in Washington, in New Orleans, and in Brooklyn. He tries to manufacture his way there potentially, and instead, at 5, he goes to the Utah Jazz. So there's no trade opportunity for Brooklyn. And in the end, they don't get that chance to move up the board to maybe target him. One thing I'll quickly note before we get to Egor Demin here, who is the Nets' 8th overall pick out of BYU, is that the one thing that maybe got lost in this was, is there anybody else, right? Because so much focus was about Ace Bailey and his manufacturing of wanting to get out there. Could the Nets have tried to move up the board even modestly a couple of spots and get a Jeremiah Fears, get a Trey Johnson? It doesn't seem like it, right? A lot of these teams were comfortable to pick where they were, and it's something we talked about. There were trades when you get back into the 10 to 15 range, certainly. There were trades even in the 20s, but for the most part, because deep talent pools and the way the board falls makes it easy for certain franchises, even if, let's say, Jeremiah Fears wasn't necessarily option 1 or 2 from the Pelicans' perspective, but then he's there at 7, and you think, yeah, this is an opportunity for us. Let's take advantage of it. So, Brooklyn Nets take Egor Demin at 8. Right off the bat, what's the problem here? Went and looked at a lot of other draft boards, the typical ones, whether it was ESPN, Bleacher Report, The Athletic, a handful of others. And by and large, these were players that the Nets took that were maybe lower on most boards relative to where the Nets took them. Now, I had gone through this when I was still on Locked On with the mock draft, and in doing that, I looked at trying to condense some picks. And ultimately, I made trades. Cam Johnson was gone. I had the 15th pick, and that's where I took Egor Demin, because to me, it represented value. And I thought if the Brooklyn Nets were approaching this draft and thinking about 26, 27, and some of those later picks, maybe they'd try to go that route for a player like Demin. Across all these other platforms, 11th, 9th, 16th, 15th, an outlier at 25. So even though you may sit here and say, the Brooklyn Nets, gosh, that's a reach there. Well, ninth, 11th, even 15th. The reality is, if the Brooklyn Nets, and you can judge them for it if you want, but if the Brooklyn Nets viewed it as, we're not going to be able to get back up the board here from 19, 22, 26, or 27. So that means whoever we're taking, like the pick we make here is going to be the player that we have to associate with everyone else after him through 19, right? So you have Colin Murray Boyles, who goes 9. I don't think that was on the Nets' radar. Molly Watch was obviously one that a lot of people discussed. Nets need a big with that upside, but it didn't seem like that was ever really in consideration. For me, Noah Senge, talked about him a ton. That would have been my pick here. The other one, in all honesty, and I did a write-up on this over on the Substack, I think a couple weeks ago, debating if Cedric Howard should be worthy of the 8th overall pick. If the Brooklyn Nets had taken Cedric Howard at 8, I would have been instantly excited. Primarily because not only his rise, obviously, over the draft process and leading up to it, but because that upside, the possibility of what he could be, right? That's the sell. That's the sell in a different way than an Egor Demin, to me. So that became really interesting. Those are probably the two players that, if I sit here today, Molly Watch, I would not have taken at 8, him being there. I would not be taking a Derek Queen at 8, right? And then at that point, you get into the Carter Bryants, the Thomas Sorbers of the world. There's nobody else really there. Those are the only two players for me over Demin that I would have had a conversation about. That being said, Egor Demin was regarded as the best passer in the draft class. 6'8", 200 pounds, young player, obviously. Most of the players the Nets took, 19 to 20 years old, coming out here. It's going to be a long developmental process, potentially. We could be talking about him another year from now, and where's the state of his game? But the belief is that through the combine and through the draft process, that you already saw Demin clean up some of those shooting mechanics a little bit. The Nets have needed a high-level orchestrator of the offense. They get it in Egor Demin. Now, the shooting has to come around. This is a guy who, at BYU, this past season, shot under 30% from 3. And I'm being generous. I could say he shot under 28% from 3, right? On almost 5 attempts per game, shot a hair over 27%. He also only shot 41% from the field. He also shot under 70% from the free throw line. The shooting is the concern. If the Brooklyn Nets believe that they can develop the shot for Egor Demin, then you have that guy. You have a 6'8", 200-pound table-setting guard who also, if the shot comes around, can flex out into that forward role. And we'll talk about that when we look at the other picks that the Nets made here. And yes, on a high level, there's some maybe fit concern around the total draft class here. But that's how close you can be to having a true, unique talent. It's not sexy. It's not day one, game 1 of 82 next season, where we're going to get these amazing plays. But if you believe in, and that's a big if you believe in the Nets' ability to evaluate talent, and if you believe in the model, as we've heard Sean Marks, we'll get into this more over the next couple of weeks, where he and the Nets see the league going, right? High IQ, understanding of the game, ball movement, quick decisions, being able to get the ball, process, distribute, attack, whatever the case may be, right? Being able to be on the front end of that. Egor Demin can do that. On ball, creating for himself off the dribble, that's a different conversation. Not a perfect prospect. You're not going to get the perfect prospect at 8. You're not getting Cooper Flagg at 8. So I like Egor Demin as a prospect. I'm fine with them having taken him at 8. And now you start to have the conversation about what could it have looked like. I say Cedric Howard. I say Noah Senge. Those are the only two players that I would have considered differently here. So now the Nets have a guard with size that can orchestrate the offense and that they believe can have that shot come around. When they get to 19, this is where it becomes interesting, or at least from a Nets fan's perspective. Nolan Traoré, guard out of France, right? Nets need guard play. The debate around Cam Thomas and can he be the pure, could he be an on-ball creator? End of last season, small sample size, but exciting sample size around what he was able to do in terms of setting the table for others. The debate about, well, does he have enough talent around him to really be able to evaluate that? So we knew the Nets were going to need multiple guards coming out of this draft. Nolan Traoré was linked to the Brooklyn Nets for a long time. The reason why you like him is because at one point prior to the draft, he was considered to be a top 5 prospect. This past season didn't go the way that he wanted necessarily, and so it looks different, right? But he basically lived in this 19 kind of range. He lived in the 17 to 23 kind of range, right? And in living in that range, the real question here, for different reasons, but not unlike Egor Demin, is can the shot come around? Now, again, these are very different players because you're talking about a 6'3". I've seen some places that now maybe he's up to, a $185, listed 175, coming into the draft process, playing over in France, playing for San Quentin this past season. The things that you like about his game is speed. I mean, elite speed talent. Unlike Demin, this is a guard that can orchestrate the offense, like Demin, but then can also attack downhill and get at the basket. Problem? Finishing around the basket, right? Only shot 39% this past year from the field overall. 45% from two-point range, only 30% from beyond the arc. But this is where I think there's a disconnect. And out of this entire 5-man draft class, I look at Nolan Traoré as one of the guys, potentially, that fans are going to get excited about early. When you look at what he did in just 7 games in 23-24, 37% from the field, 42% from two-point range, 25% on 3 attempts from beyond the arc. Not great. But the very next year, when real volume comes in, playing 3 minutes more per game over 30 games, modest, but an increase from the field, 39%. 45% from two-point range. 30% from beyond the arc is it's not exciting as a number by itself, but on over 4 attempts per game and moving the needle from 25 to 30, that does matter. That means that you can envision a young player, just 19 years old, who continues to develop the perimeter shot. And if you're talking about, even though we want guys that can really knock down from deep, but if we're talking about someone that you say he's knocking down 33 to 35% maybe as a rookie, that moves the needle for you. It has to happen in order to feel really good about it. But I don't think that that's out of the range of possibilities here as he comes in as a rookie for the Brooklyn Nets. The other areas that you like are maintain consistency, had over 5 assists in those 7 games, had over 5 assists in those 30 games, right? You like the fact that in 7 games playing under 20 minutes, he had 3 turnovers per game. And at over 22 minutes in 30 games, he brought it down to 2.5. Those are hard numbers, too, to kind of gauge and look at a little bit. Because who is he playing with? What's the system? What's the setup, right? Sometimes turnovers are a product of the players that you're on the court with, expectations, etc. He also didn't see a move in 3 more minutes per game in terms of personal fouls. He's a scrappy defender. He's going to be undersized. So there are the concerns there. But I like Nolan Traoré. The only other move that I would have made here, I think, and people have already brought this up, is going with Kasparas. Kasparas Giannakis was considered to be a fringe top 10 player. He was 10th on the Nets big board, which, by the way, is 1 spot higher than Egor Demin on ESPN's big board, excuse me. And this is a guy that can shoot. He had the injury, right? Can do a bit of everything on the offensive end. You can say you would have preferred Giannakis. And I would not knock you for it. After that, I don't know. Looking at a Will Riley, sure, there's things to like about it, but I think you're as far away from what that could be potentially as you are with anybody in this range. Giannakis is the one because of where he had been as a player and what it could have meant, right? But again, Nolan Traoré, former top 5 considered prospect. He sits in this kind of range. He was 23rd on ESPN's big board. Other than Giannakis, I don't think there's another guy here that I would have been looking at necessarily. Now, it starts to get a little bit funky here. Not in this moment. But we get to 22, and it's Drake Powell. It gets a little funky here for a couple of reasons. Not for Drake Powell himself. I like Drake Powell. right? You finally, after taking two guys where the main conversation is, well, what's this going to look like? If the shot doesn't come around, what are we talking about? The discussion about how they want to play together in terms of rotations, which we'll get into down the line. But then you get to Drake Powell, and it's like, it's easy to see it. Played 37 games at UNC, right? He knocked down a 38% from beyond the arc. Like, that's what you were hoping for, right? A player that can be a perimeter shooter, a 3-and-D kind of mold guy, has some nice physical traits. Think that he can attack down the hill and get at the basket. There's some areas, though, even for the physical presence, and he has kind of a very good aggressive nature to him, especially on the defensive end, has a 7-foot wingspan, right? So you like that. 25 blocks in 37 games. You like that. 26 steals in 37 games. You like that, right? So those are things that you take away as positives. The 65% from the free throw line, not good enough. The only, I think, just over 2 free throw attempts per game, not good enough while averaging almost 26 minutes. But again, this is a rookie. And a reminder, you're taking him 22nd overall. Even though it's a deeper draft class, so I think you elevate some of what you think these players can be. He still is a later first-round pick. So he's not going to be a perfect player. But I liked this pick. You get some shooting touch. I think about him as being someone who can just gradually develop basically all facets of his game. And in doing so, you get yourself that fits the mold of a wing, 3-and-D type of player. Backcourt, only 6'5", 200 pounds. Again, you can flex him out to the wing. I said it about Demin. I think you can move him into that role at times, right? You can put Drake Powell in the backcourt alongside a Nolan Traoré if you want to. So there's some flexibility, I think, in role. I like this player. I'm perfectly fine with it. Other guys that you could consider taking here. I will say, just like with Yakachionis, there is a world where, because even though Newell ends up being listed as the 19th overall prospect, again, at one point was considered to be a top 10. Doug and I had talked about it previously. Didn't think it quite ever got there for us. We never really considered him a viable option for Brooklyn, specifically when you're talking about the 8th overall pick. But I think you would at least put him on the board here at this point. 6'9", 224. You say, hey, while we understand the under 7-foot wingspan, by the way, Drake Powell, 7-foot wingspan. Newell, 6'11" wingspan. How about that? Even though he's 4 inches taller. Maybe you put him in the discussion. I wouldn't have ended up taking him here, but I think you put him in the discussion. And then guys like Hugo Gonzalez that we had talked about previously, I think there's a lot of nice upside with a player like that. There are guys that didn't go until the second round. I'm saying their names here now because we did discuss them in the 20s, right? The top of the second round here, and the Nets traded away their 36th overall pick, ultimately landing with the LA Lakers. Guys like Rasheer Fleming, Noah Penda would have been one of those dudes. A lot of people feel like his baseline at 6'7", 242, not a high-level athlete, but a high-level processor of the game, right? And we'll talk about the Nets trading away that pick here at the back end too, and why I think they ended up making that choice based on the way the board fell. But so, I mean, other than that, and you can maybe you want to make the case, I'll say Rasheer Fleming here because you can restate his name when you get to 26 and to 27. Yeah. Like, you can do it. You know what the biggest concern with a guy like Rasheer Fleming might be at 6'8", 232? Right? It's the feel for the game, processing the game. I don't think that he fit the mold of what the Brooklyn Nets wanted to do, even if I like him as a talent. So there's not a lot of other guys that I would have taken over Drake Powell here. I think Drake Powell could have been taken 26 or 27, and it wouldn't have, changed anything. Will Riley, as I mentioned there, right? He goes just ahead of you at 21. These are kind of the guys. And you can have the conversation, obviously, about Nick Clifford, right? But a late bloomer, 23 years old, is that something the Nets want to do? Probably the only two names that I'm, Nick Clifford, Hugo Gonzalez. Those might be the only two guys. So I liked that pick there. You're adding something into the mix. Then we get to 26 and Ben Saraf, right? 6'6", 200 pounds. Again, isolate this player unto itself. Take away everything else that's gone on and just say, all we're really asking here is this a good prospect that you would like to see potentially develop for your team? The answer is yes. Right? Like the answer is yes. I would like to see a player with his skill set develop for the Brooklyn Nets. The problem? You already took two other players that have shooting issues, right? You already took guys that have low percentages from beyond the arc, 30 and below. And that's what we have here again. And the real issue here with this potential prospect is that when it comes to three-point shooting, basically on the same volume, a little over 3 in 2 seasons ago, little under 3 this past year, the three-point shooting went down. And that's hard to do when you're only shooting 29%, down to 22%, right? The field goal percentage went up, 48% from 2-point range after being only 44%. So some things are moving in the right direction. Free throw shooting went in the right direction, 78% up from 70%, right? Turnovers, though, really ballooned here. Really ballooned, up to 2.5 turnovers per game. Personal foul stayed steady, right? The assists went up, an extra assist per game. He's another, can see the court, can facilitate, understands and reads the game well, can use him in the pick and roll, certainly. I think, again, this is not necessarily, we talk about freak athletes. Egor Demin is not a freak athlete. Ben Saraf is not a freak athlete. So the Nets clearly were focused on guys that could process the game at a high level, and they believe will help keep the ball moving. A lot of people have already referenced building kind of a model of the Indiana Pacers. I don't know. There was some little whispers, and I want to get confirmation from this in the next couple of weeks, about whether or not the idea is that Ben's going to be here from day one, or could he remain overseas for another season? That may or may not bother Nets fans. And again, when you go back to the board and you say whether or not you wanted Drake Powell at 22, what would you have done differently here? Hugo Gonzalez would still be an option on the board again, right? Some people talked about, well, Liam McNeely is a walk in the door. You know what you're getting from him, the second that he steps on the court. That's true. Like, there's no denying that. But is that a mold of player that you dream on being this next thing over a couple of seasons, right? That's the question that's being asked here. Are you going to give yourself a player that has the potential to be a unique weapon for your team going forward? With 3 out of the first 4 picks for Brooklyn, the conversation is about if the shot comes around. Does shooting really matter in the NBA? Like, is that really important? Whether or not you can shoot? It's massively important. So there isn't, again, I don't know if there's something different that I would have done here. I like him as a player. I personally, and this maybe ages poorly because of the way the draft board unfolded, again, I'll mention Fleming, I'll mention Penda, you can go with some of these guys. I'll mention Maxime Renaud because I liked him. He goes 42nd, right? I liked him for the Brooklyn Nets, a 7-footer. Certainly defensive liability or question marks about how much he's going to hold up. He's a very lengthy lengthy? Gangly. 7-footer, right? So there's a question about the defensive end, but just he stretches the floor. He can shoot the perimeter shot. It's something that helps complement the other things that you've done here. I'll still keep him on my list, but it looks like by NBA standards, he was not a guy that was going to get considered in the first round, even though he had lived in that mid-20s, back end of the first kind of range for most of the time leading up. And then we come to who, ironically, is a guy that I brought up early. Doug Norrie got me kind of cooled off on him a little bit, but Danny Wolf, 6'11", 252 out of Michigan. And Drake Powell, who maybe people weren't so sure of, I think he's a guy you can watch early if he's going to get minutes. We'll talk about the Terrence Mann of it all, the veterans on this roster, and what that means for rotations. But Danny Wolf is a very easy pick for me at 27 here, because he's the jack of all, master of none, has played different roles in different systems, and does enough of everything that you see exactly how he can impact a team early in his career. And he's over 21 years old. One of the oldest player that the Nets drafted. So it makes sense. 3 seasons across Yale and Michigan. You're talking about a guy who did exactly what you would want from a Brooklyn Nets perspective as a big. Now you're going to play him probably at the 4, not the 5. Yeah, most likely. But he shot 34% for his career in college from beyond the arc. The free throw shooting plummeted in that final season at Michigan, sub 60. So you hope that's a blip, not a trend, because he was up over 71% the year prior at Yale, right? So you need that number to be good. He also had 132 assists in 37 games at Michigan, right? So everything about his game, he was a 13, almost a double-double, right? 13, 9.7 rebounds, 3.5 assists per game this past season. I love him as a late first round pick who can be a nice connector for your offense. The simplest way to frame this is, where does it work? This actually works really well with Nicholas Claxton, because now on the defensive end, where you're worried about lateral quickness for Danny Wolf and whether or not he's going to be able to hold up, switching out on the perimeter, he's probably not going to, right? There's going to be a lot of more athletic wings that are going to be a problem for him to get over to and to cover. But Nicholas Claxton can do that for you. It'll create mismatches and problems. It's not perfect, but when you have Nick Claxton, at least for right now, and his versatility defensively, yeah, that can work. And then in transition and going into offense, it helps just as much. Nicholas Claxton wants to get out and run. Nicholas Claxton did not have a good year last year. But like we talk about with everybody, especially when we discuss Cam Thomas, who else does he have there to help make his job easier? Nicholas Claxton is a complementary piece. He's not a leading piece. So Danny Wolf can do that. Let's get out in transition. Let's see the court well. Let's process, right? And frankly, I'm going to go back and watch more of his game, offensively especially. You know, is there enough quickness there? Some of the moves that you see at Michigan, can those translate fully, or will there be a defender just shifting his feet, keeping in front of him, and shutting down, you know, some of those looks that Danny Wolf could develop at the college level that may not translate to the NBA? I don't know, but the passing game is exquisite. He needs to be, you know, he's not a high level athlete. The rebounding, I think, is going to be a little bit funky. I think he'll get pushed around a little bit on the boards. But this is a motor guy. This is a guy that's going to, you know, give you everything he's got. And if you're over on X, the polls have closed out, I think, today. Officially, we're going with Wonder Bread. Wonder Bread is the name. We're going to do nicknames for everybody. And I hope, listen, you can get into the comments. If you're after this podcast, get over to Substack, We Got Nets. You can subscribe. The feed will be there. You can also get the feed over on Spotify and those other platforms. But when we posted this up, we asked the question, are we talking about nicknames for our favorite players? White chocolate, Wonder Bread, vanilla milkshake, make sure I get that clean, and SPF 100. With 35.8% of the votes, Danny Wonder Bread Wolf is the new nickname for our last pick in the NBA draft. I like this pick. Okay, high level, what's the problem? You took a lot of non-shooters. You end up with 3 guards on the roster, right? You end up with a lot of high basketball processors that need to improve significantly in specific areas of their game. When we turn around and we think about, the Nets came in saying, we want guys that fit a certain mold. We've heard Sean Marks talk about it on the back end, and we're okay with having this upcoming season be that full developmental year for all of them. From what you get, having been into some of the Twitter groups with Saint, with Nets Kingdom, with Bob Sack, with Jay from BK, all the usual guys, right, that are so dedicated to being around this team and talking about this team. It was, hey, if all these dudes play as rookies, right, if you commit to the development, then you can accept the fact that maybe you can't quite see the vision of what they were doing, or they should have taken player XYZ, whatever it may be, right? But you turn around, you bury these guys under some veterans, and it's going to be a potential issue at Barclays. But this is what we believe, Doug and I, when we were on the previous network. This is what we believed it was going to be: big swings on high upside guys, which Saraf, which Traoré, which Demin all are, and then you get a couple of baseline. And I think the upside potentially, it's not an elite level ceiling, but I do like the ceiling for Drake Powell, and then a guy that comes in with, I think, an immediate baseline. Danny Wolf next year is going to be the early, I think, favorite to show the fan base something, right? Because he's going to operate out of a position with a skill set the Nets haven't had. And so I think there'll be some really fun moments for him early. I think Nolan Traoré can be that other guy early. Egor Demin, I think we'll get flashes, but I think that his road is longer. And that's going to frustrate the fan base. But this is what the Brooklyn Nets wanted to do. This is how they wanted to approach the draft. And the last thing I'll put in here, because I mentioned it with Demin, 11th, 9th, 16th, 15th, 25th. Traoré, most boards, 23rd, 28th, 26th, 24th, and outlier 8th. So yes, the Nets drafted maybe early on a player like Traoré. Powell, 29th, 27th, 30th, 23rd, 29th. Again, a little early potentially. Ben, 30th, 15th, 29th, 44th, 22nd. maybe right in that kind of range. A couple of outliers on either end of the spectrum. And then Wolf is the closest probably to like meeting value. 25th, 26th, 13th, 32nd, 33rd. There you go. Right? So yeah, the Nets had their board and they went where they felt comfortable. And as far as the second round goes, here's why I think the Brooklyn Nets traded that pick away. And some might say, oh, you could have tried to get up to get one of these guys. But Fleming goes 31st. Penda goes 32nd. Thiero goes 36th, where the Nets were. I didn't see him necessarily as being a guy for Brooklyn per se. But the guys, I think that those top couple of guys in Fleming and Penda, they were going to go. If you got the sense that they were going to be gone, then you can go ahead and move on, right? So that's why I think that they moved away from that. The Nets also brought in a player from Alabama, I believe. And we will talk about him next week as well. And I'm going to try to get the name up here real quick before we get out the door. In the meantime, Grant Nelson. So he'll be in. We'll talk about his game. There's some things to like. There's some things to be concerned about, right? That's what an undrafted, rookie free agent is going to look like. In the end, how starkly different would my version of the draft have looked? Not terribly. Again, a Senge, maybe it's a Senge over Demin. And then the rest of the draft might have looked similar. For me, if I was giving you my alternate universe, I won't even say Cedric Coward. Maybe I will say Cedric Coward, right? Cedric Coward at 8. I'll stay with Nolan Traoré at 19 because I've liked him a lot. Yakachionis is there, so you could make that decision. I'll still go with Renault at 26. At 22, I'll stay with Drake Powell. He wasn't like necessarily the number one guy or like high guy there for me, but I like the skill set. Something like that, but it's margin moves to me. We'll see how it plays out. The unfortunate part about this is it wasn't a clean sense of victory, right? The Nets draft room is high five and clap your hands, say yeah, right? Like that vision there for a Nets fan base did not feel like we just moved up and got Ace Bailey, right? We just got Jeremiah Fears fell to us, right? Well, whoever the guy was going to be, it didn't give that buzz to the fan base, and there's going to need to be patience for that. The Nets are going to do a lot of losing this upcoming season, but the sell here is this is the young core. Now come watch them grow. And by the end of this upcoming season, along with Noah Clowney, along with Dariq Whitehead, along with Cam Thomas, right? What do we have? Look at the roster for the Brooklyn Nets. We'll come back and talk about rotations, but look at the roster now for the Brooklyn Nets. There's nobody on this team outside of a couple of veterans that are going to be over 23 years old, right? Claxton's 26. Clowney's 20. Egor Demin's 19. Cam Johnson's 29. Keon Johnson, 23. Maxwell Lewis, if he's going to be back, 22. Terrence Mann, the other veteran, at 28. Tyrese Martin, not going to be here. D'Anthony Melton, not going to be here. D'Angelo Russell, not going to be here with all these guards now. Saraf, 19. Day'Ron Sharpe, 23. Cam Thomas, 23. 24 for even Drew Timme, non-guaranteed contract. 19 for Nolan Traoré. 24 for Trendon Watford, probably not back. Dariq Whitehead, 20 years old. Jalen Wilson, 24 years old. The aged veteran now, right? That's what it is, youth movement. So we'll come back in. If you want to get the feed, like I said, We Got Nets. It's out there. It's up there. You can go find it along with this episode. Over on Substack, I did quick breakdowns of Demin, of Traoré, of Powell over there, right on draft night, just instant reaction thoughts about it. We'll come back in next week. We'll talk about rotations. We'll talk about complementary fits. We'll talk about what free agency is going to look like. And we'll talk about talking with Eric Slater, going to be over on the Locked On podcast at some point next week, sitting down with him, chopping it up, right? Having the conversation all about what the Nets accomplished. That being the case, thanks for coming back in. Thanks for supporting it. Thanks for being on social and saying, hey, like when are you going to do an episode? Is it going to come up? Where can we get it? It's here. You're listening to it. Really appreciate it. Appreciate the support, guys. Let's keep it rocking, keep it rolling. And also, at least for right now, when it comes to closing these out, I'll go ahead and keep it classic. I miss my friend Doug. And I can't wait until we're all back together again, talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball.